The Making of a Luna. Previous episodes are available on the playlist. You can also visit our website for your favorite stories. A link is provided in the video description. Episode 15. What is the nature of the matter? The inquiry was posed to the other parties with comparable fervor. Their acquaintance had a cousin who was employed in a culinary establishment located in one of the adjacent structures to the palace. The young woman's role was that of an assistant in the kitchen, and she was situated at a greater distance from the private quarters of His Highness. However, she was privy to certain information regarding his private life on occasion and would subsequently apprise her cousin of these details. The information was scant, yet for those women intrigued by the enigmatic Luna, who had been concealed by the aforementioned individual for several years, it proved to be sufficient. After a prolonged period, the king had finally identified a suitable partner. However, rather than the customary practice of introducing her to the alphas, he had instead concealed her within the confines of the royal palace. This decision served to exacerbate the intrigue surrounding her identity, fostering an environment of mounting curiosity among the populace as time elapsed. Initially, the group of friends speculated that the king was embarrassed by his partner and refrained from displaying her publicly. However, this rumor rapidly dissipated. The diligent monarch, who had historically traveled extensively and assumed a high degree of responsibility independently, underwent a sudden and significant transformation. Prior to this, His Highness's lack of familial obligations and personal interests led him to dedicate himself fully to his royal duties, often engaging in matters that extended beyond the conventional scope of a king. He addressed even minor issues that could be managed by others, provided he had sufficient time, taking on these tasks himself. However, he began to demonstrate a marked tendency to delegate tasks to others, and his travel patterns underwent a shift, becoming more sedentary and occurring primarily in the confines of his personal quarters. In light of the urgency and sensitivity of the tasks at hand, it was deemed necessary to relocate his office to his private quarters. According to the aforementioned sources, the individual in question had also bestowed upon the woman a plethora of costly gifts and meticulously catered to her every desire. It is also noteworthy that the council members had previously met with the woman and expressed their admiration for her, despite never disclosing her identity. According to the latest research, the rumored motive of keeping her identity hidden changed. It has been revealed that the king was so in love with his mate, having waited for her for decades, that he only wanted to keep her to himself for some years before allowing others to know of her. It has been reported that His Highness discovered two idle maids engaged in idle discourse a few days ago, as he was passing through the corridor. The two young women were engaged in a discussion about the Luna, contemplating the aesthetic qualities of the Queen. Upon realizing the absence of His Highness, they were immobilized by fear, contemplating the potential consequences of the King's actions. It is widely acknowledged that His Highness exhibits unrelenting severity when provoked. However, the king proceeded with composure, as though he had not perceived the auditory stimulus. Upon observing the subject's persistent movement and apparent absence of emotional response, the observers experienced a brief sense of relief. However, this sense of reassurance was transient. His Highness halted his steps, having traversed a distance of 2 or 3 steps from their current position. The woman then proceeded to provide a detailed explanation, pausing intermittently to create an atmosphere of mounting suspense. The inquiry continues with a request for elaboration on the subsequent events. The girls, intrigued and curious, inquired about the unfortunate fate of the two maids. The woman's expression revealed a sense of satisfaction with the focus placed on her and her statements, and she proceeded to elaborate further. Then His Highness, without turning around and looking at the two, spoke without warning. "She is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and I have been alive for a century. It is my hope that this will satisfy your curiosity," he stated, prior to resuming his steps accompanied by his beta, that the subjects expressed heightened emotional responses, characterized by exclamation and a sense of envy towards the woman who had become the object of his romantic interest. This response is consistent with the anticipated behavior of the king's consort. The woman nodded her affirmation, expressing her unwavering conviction in the queen's profound influence over the king. Affirmative. It is evident that she possesses an exceptional level of physical attractiveness, which naturally leads to the question of whether she could be considered perfect, especially when considered in conjunction with the strongest werewolf. To be forthright, I experienced a modicum of trepidation 5 years ago when your sister accompanied the king to the winter ball. It was hypothesized that she would become his romantic partner by leveraging his lack of a romantic partner and inserting herself into his life. It is difficult to predict the reaction of one's elder sister, who has accused us of bullying her. It is conceivable that she requested the king to annihilate us. Fortunately, His Highness swiftly located his consort. Another woman exhaled audibly. Illyra's status as a moonlight was a cause for alarm, but her reign as queen elicited a sense of profound dread. As a moonlight, she was subject to a set of regulations that necessitated adherence to specific protocols. The prerogative to exact retribution without explicit justification was not among them. However, as a queen, during her time in the pack, the subjects' interactions were characterized by a certain degree of levity. While it is possible that she was subjected to harassment at school, this would have been limited to minor incidents. Given her proximity to the king, it is plausible that the petty woman wielded influence over him, potentially exerting a negative influence on her home pack. Your assessment is accurate. On the topic of your sister, has there been any progress in her communication with you? It was acknowledged by another woman that Lyra was the intended recipient of the statement. Lyra endeavored to maintain composure in the face of their assertions. Subjecta experienced feelings of jealousy towards Illyra during the winter ball event in years past. Upon returning home, she became enraged to discover that her friends were already privy to this information. However, the subsequent absence of any further news regarding Illyra led to a sense of contentment for Subject A. The older sister's ability to remain by the king's side was solely attributable to her status as an alpha. However, this advantage became moot once the king discovered the true Luna. Her reaction was one of jubilation, derived from the misfortune she had endured. We have no knowledge of her current whereabouts. Illyra has changed her telephone number, and we were unable to ascertain it. Despite Lucian's enrollment at the academy the following year, he did not encounter her, as she was engaged in practice drills outside the academy's premises. Subsequent to that occurrence, the individual in question has not been observed, and her current whereabouts remain unknown. Honestly, I and my parents are quite worried about her. Lyra articulated her sentiments with a voice that was noticeably raspy, her tone conveying a sense of profound concern. The other girls also appeared somewhat dejected, sympathizing with her. However, By this point, the group had become cognizant of Lyra's genuine character, leading to a general skepticism towards her statements. In point of fact, a conclusion had already been reached regarding Illyra, whereby the meaning of Lyra's words should be interpreted in the opposite way. Therefore, if the Luna expressed concern, it can be deduced that her sentiments were not directed towards her older sister. So, another rumor. One of the women initiated a verbal contribution, thereby ameliorating the minor sense of social discomfort and resuming the discourse. The royal palace is the site of the following events. Your Highness, it is imperative that you cease impeding our assembly. It is imperative to acknowledge the significance of these elements in the context of our race. It is perplexing to comprehend the actions of an individual who exerts such an authoritarian and oppressive influence over others. Varrock engaged in a rational discourse with Theron, even raising his voice slightly in a display of irritation. The king had been raised in the elder's presence, and therefore did not take umbrage at the latter's discourtesy. Varrock, it would be advisable for you to abandon this subject immediately. The objective of the meeting was not a subject that should be deliberated upon. It is imperative to consider the necessity and efficacy of further meetings. It is evident that their value is negligible. Theron exhaled audibly. That is not the case. It is difficult to fathom how such a phenomenon could occur. The elder individual solidified his position. I have already secured my queen. What other problems could you possibly have? The king inquired, emitting another sigh. Despite his awareness of their motivations, he opted to feign ignorance. Locating Her Highness marks merely the inaugural stage of the undertaking. It is imperative to note that this phenomenon is not an isolated occurrence. Varrock articulated his thoughts with alacrity, subsequently placing a document before Theron. Varrock, it would be prudent to temper your enthusiasm. I am desirous of spending a period of time with my companion before she is potentially taken away by some objectionable youth. Theron stated, and then discarded the file in a negligent manner on a proximate table. The title alone was sufficient to evoke a sense of irritation, compelling the reader to refrain from opening the document to ascertain its contents. The designation Bulletproof Project for an Early Heir was conspicuously displayed in bold letters on the file. The aforementioned individuals seemingly had no more pressing concerns, as evidenced by their decision to interfere in this matter. Nevertheless, Your Highness, the necessity of an heir is paramount. You have already attained a lifespan of 100 years. The council member exhibited a profound sense of sorrow. You have already acquired a queen, so I inquire as to whether I am permitted to retain her company for a limited period. We are currently in our honeymoon period. Theron reasoned. The inquiry posed pertained to the duration of the honeymoon period, which had already elapsed for a period of 5 years. The elder continued to inquire with a stern tone, observing that Theron remained unperturbed by his tears. The assertion that a negative response should be interpreted as an affirmative response is a fallacy. It is imperative to cease this behavior immediately. I will not have a child yet. Theron's patience was finally exhausted. Subsequently, he initiated further discourse, as the elder had finally become silent, thus bringing the exchange to a close. He was eager to return to Illyra. However, he found himself unable to articulate any coherent thoughts, as the distinctive fragrance of strawberries, with which he was intimately familiar, enveloped him. Upon directing his gaze toward the door, he observed the beautiful woman, whose eyes were brimming with tears. In a state of heightened anxiety, Theron rapidly proceeded towards her in the subsequent instant. "My dear, have you been experiencing any difficulties? What transpired?" he inquired in a gentle yet hurried manner, wiping away her tears. The inquiry posed sought to ascertain whether there was a lack of interest in procreation with the individual in question. Ilara articulated, her speech marked by a pronounced stuttering. Her emotional state was becoming increasingly unstable, and his remarks served only to exacerbate this volatility. "Indeed, I desire it. It is difficult to conceive of an alternative response. I simply desire to enjoy your company for a more extended period." He promptly offered reassurance. The responsibility for the misinterpretation of the gentleman's words lay with Ilara. "Is that so?" she inquired, pausing intermittently to shed tears. "Indeed. After a span of several decades, we will have children, as many as you wish to have." He promptly articulated his perspective. Upon hearing the king's utterances, Varek experienced a state of imminent syncope, precipitated by the mere mention of the term decades. Given his advanced age surpassing 2 centuries, it is conceivable that he would have already passed away by the time the heir was born. It is difficult to fathom how Theron was able to accomplish this feat. Theron had theorized that his words would appease the diminutive woman, however, his words only exacerbated her despondency, inducing an outpouring of tears. "What is the nature of the issue at hand? I will rectify the situation promptly." Theron articulated his perspective with alacrity, though he remained uncertain as to the precise nature of his misstep. "I am pregnant. It is evident that the child is not desired." She issued a stern reprimand, her voice characterized by a certain raspiness. The elder, observing the verbal exchange, expressed elation through a vocalization. This phenomenon suggests the continued presence and protective influence of the goddess, a notion that is further reinforced by the historical and cultural context. In contrast to the jubilant reaction exhibited by Varek, Theron's countenance conveyed a state of profound petrification. "Observe the following: you do not want the baby." Ilara's reaction prompted a spontaneous inclination to retreat. However, she merely turned her head to the side, refusing to take a step back, when Theron swept her off her feet, embracing her firmly. "This is perplexing," he inquired, observing her in a state of profound elation. The plan had been to allow Ilara to act according to her own volition until she reached the age of 30. Her aspiration was to become a moonlight, and following his graduation, he informed her that she too could become a genuine moonlight. The remainder of her life as a queen would become increasingly restricted, as she would be recognized by all, when he introduced her to the werewolves, and she could no longer accomplish her childhood dream. He was unwilling to impede her freedom, and thus he permitted her to continue her uninhibited existence for a period of no less than 8 additional years, during which time she would fulfill the moonlight duty. Concurrently, he aspired to maintain her anonymity, desiring her as an exclusive personal companion, a decision influenced by the potential for their relationship to be further diminished by her royal status. The moonlight position would also ensure that she was occupied and not in his proximity for extended periods of time. However, the obligations inherent to her royal position were even more demanding in terms of time investment. Subsequently, upon reaching the age of 30, he would formally present her to society. The limited personal time she would subsequently have was intended to be devoted exclusively to him for a period of approximately 10 years, following the birth of their offspring. This was the initial plan. However, upon receiving this news, such thoughts were immediately dispelled. It is reasonable to assume that he would desire custody of the infant, as it is the progeny of their love. Upon observing that the individual did not harbor resentment towards the proposal, she experienced a sense of reassurance. This was due to the fact that the individual continued to embrace her and bestow kisses upon her countenance. Consequently, she ascertained that the individual's actions were not motivated by a desire to appease her, but rather by genuine contentment. Are you well? What is the patient's current emotional state? The question is posed whether the subject would like to partake in a meal. Does the subject experience a sense of vertigo? Is there anything I can do to assist you? Should we consult a physician? Theron promptly initiated a subsequent series of kisses, his actions indicative of a state of agitation. The subject's self-reported state of well-being is okay. It was noted that walking was inadvisable, as it could lead to exhaustion. Theron expressed her concerns, and immediately embraced her in a manner reminiscent of a princess. I possess the ability to ambulate. Wait, let me down. Ilara immediately began to struggle, embarrassed by his actions in front of the elder, who she had just now realized was still in the room. She also perceived Theron's actions to be hyperbolic. The situation at hand was merely a pregnancy, not an injury. Despite her attempts to dissuade him, the man remained steadfast. Your Highness, naturally, you should not walk. In the event of the heir's incapacitation, the consequences could be significant. It is imperative to ensure that individuals are receiving adequate care. It would be advisable to contact the domestic personnel. The doctor's expertise is superior. In response, the elder exhibited an immediate reaction. The subject exhibited a marked cessation of physical movement, indicating a lack of resistance or effort. It was evident that the elder was eager for a successor, as evidenced by his repeated allusions to the matter whenever they were in each other's presence. However, she perceived his composure to be more pronounced than his physical appearance would suggest, given his advanced age. It is noteworthy that the elder's exaggeration surpasses that of Theron. The subject's self-assessment indicates a state of well-being. Ilara articulated her perspective with slightly more emphasis, precisely as Theron positioned her on the sofa. Your Highness, my king, then the introduction can wait no longer. The elder realized this as he engaged in future planning. It has been determined that the concealment of the Queen's presence is no longer a viable option. Theron expressed affection for her by placing his hand on her abdomen, which was not yet distended. Then I shall take my leave, as there are numerous tasks to be completed. Congratulations to both of you. Varek articulated his sentiments with a palpable emotional intensity, accompanied by a gesture of respect, and promptly took his leave. After a period of solitude, Theron embraced her with caution, apprehensive about inflicting harm upon the diminutive and cherished new life. Will you hold me accountable for this? I had previously assured you that you would be able to be a moonlight until you reached the age of 30, but now. He articulated his words with measured deliberation. No, the time you have allotted for my selfing aspirations is already more than sufficient. Typically, I would have anticipated assuming my position 5 years ago, however, Even without my explicit request, you graciously provided me with the opportunity, irrespective of the potential repercussions. Thank you." Ilara articulated her sentiments, accompanied by a subtle manifestation of emotional warmth that manifested itself as a slight reddening of her countenance. The subject expressed gratitude for the presence of a family, expressing a sense of appreciation for the familial unit that had been established. He immediately interjected, his tone conveying a sense of contentment, and he continued by slowly kissing her forehead. In the days that followed, the scene shifted to Gwen's fortress. The inquiry posed pertains to the location of the specified individuals and the status of their arrival. Gwen inquired, tapping her fingers in a rhythmic manner. The subject's countenance indicated profound displeasure, attributable to the presence of uninvited guests. These individuals were known to visit the fortress on a monthly basis, with the intention of spending the night of the full moon within its confines. Not yet. As previously mentioned, the guests will arrive in a timely manner to partake in the evening meal. There is still some time until then. The beautiful blue-eyed blonde casually informed him of the situation, displaying no signs of being perturbed by his tapping. He then allowed a period of waiting to elapse, after which he inquired once more about the arrival time. This is the 10th iteration of this phenomenon. The aforementioned items have yet to arrive. For an individual who consistently appears displeased with their visits, your anticipation each time is noteworthy. The woman's teasing tone indicated a diminution in her patience. It should be noted that I am not. I am eager to reach the conclusion of this matter. Gwen's response halted the incessant tapping, and her countenance conveyed a sense of displeasure, as if she had discerned the contents of his true thoughts. The couple's visits occurred on a monthly basis, coinciding with the full moon to appease the lichens. The purpose of their visit was to ensure the lichens' calm state, and thus, the question was posed to ascertain whether their arrival was for the purpose of remaining overnight before departing once more. That assertion is dubious. This is the rationale behind the decision to delegate the task of preparing a meal to the kitchen, with the objective of satisfying the preferences of your cousin. She exhibited a smirk, displaying a clear lack of concern regarding the fact that he was not tapping his fingers. Historically, such a gesture would have been regarded as alarming, however, at present, she perceived it as endearing, akin to a miniature outburst. At what point did I do that? The optimal culinary experience is one that incorporates both steak and steamed vegetables. The question of Theron's preferences, however, is of negligible concern. Gwen articulated rapidly, endeavoring to counteract the implications of her statements. If that is the case, then it would be pertinent to inquire as to why you became upset when I prepared it for you some days ago. Your preferred repast, to be sure. She promptly engaged in a close physical interaction with him, effectively preventing him from refuting her statements. Mother and father. The girl, aged 3 years, was observed standing in the doorway. The subject was observed rubbing her blue eyes with her hand, indicating a state of drowsiness. It is evident that the individual in question has been observed forcibly rousing another individual from their slumber by means of vocal exuberance. Gwen's disapproval of the woman was evident, as she reprimanded her in a direct manner. She then proceeded to embrace the young girl, affectionately lifting her into his arms. The woman's only response to his argument was to sigh, indicating a cessation of further dialogue. Her discourse was characterized by a subdued volume. In contrast, he elevated his voice in an attempt to refute her assertions. "My lady, your highnesses have arrived." A woman arrived promptly, apprising them of the impending visit. Gwen's only audible expression of displeasure was a soft hum, which suggested ongoing irritation. However, he proceeded towards the hallway with the young girl in his arms. "Auntie." Upon seeing Ilara, the young girl immediately initiated physical contact, extending her small arms in a gesture of endearment and solicitation for transportation. Ilara's smile directed at the young girl was met with a counteraction from Theron, who intervened before Ilara could physically collect the girl from Gwen's custody. "Hello, baby girl," Theron remarked, with a slight smile, upon seeing the girl with black hair and blue eyes, who was a precise replica of both him and Gwen. He immediately speculated about the potential resemblance of their infant son to his niece. The girl was lovely, but it would be preferable if the child resembled Ilara, he thought. The subject expressed a desire to hold her. Ilara reprimanded him, and endeavored once more to dislodge her from his grasp. "It is not possible to do so. It is inadvisable to carry heavy objects." He indicated his refusal to relinquish control of the girl by shaking his head. "My infant daughter is not a substantial individual, it is advisable to exercise restraint in one's verbal expressions." Gwen's immediate expression of dismay was palpable. "It is imperative to maintain composure in the face of defeat in a chess match. The current tally stands at 521 to 135, with my position leading by a substantial margin." Theron's demeanor remained unperturbed, undeterred by the individual's gesticulation. The assertion that one's success is the result of dishonest practices is indicative of a problematic mindset. Gwen redirected his anger toward the stingy man, who served as a constant reminder of the debt owed. "Gwen, it is imperative that you cease this behavior and acknowledge the fact that you have been vanquished." The girl's mother's voice emanated from behind him. "That is not accurate." Gwen attempted to refute the assertion, yet the woman who had long exhibited no trepidation in his presence spoke over him as if this were a customary occurrence. He presided over the lichens, ensuring order in Ilara's absence, though in her presence, that duty appeared to be of negligible importance. "In any case, matters of a grave nature, you are incapable of." "Are you pregnant?" the woman inquired with evident enthusiasm. Ilara's silence and subsequent gesture of assent, characterized by a subtle nod, effectively conveyed their shared perspective, thereby serving as a tacit agreement between them. "Indeed, we will have." For this reason, we also extended invitations to Felicia and Leona to attend the coronation. It is no longer possible to conceal Ilara's identity. It must be noted that no mention was made by the aforementioned party of this individual. Gwen's initial reaction to the news was one of shock. "Who has requested your presence?" Theron's discourse was characterized by a certain irony, as he spoke without directing his gaze toward the subject in question and proceeded along the hallway. The individual in question expressed skepticism regarding the rationale for which the invitation bearing the name of the cousin was to be brought, rather than merely providing verbal notification. Ilara's immediate response was characterized by a subtle rolling of her eyes, which might have been indicative of her internal disdain. The assertion was made with the intention of prompting the guards to grant admission, given the necessity of the invitation for such access. Theron's refusal was accompanied by a steadfast continuation of his forward movement. In fact, it is common knowledge that he is your cousin. It is difficult to fathom why anyone would have denied him entry to the palace. It is evident that the individual in question was reluctant to address the issue directly. It is also noteworthy that the council members were explicitly instructed to schedule the coronation day to avoid the timing of the full moon. This revelation was met with a playful expression, thereby unveiling the truth. Theron found himself unable to articulate any further comments. Naturally, he refrained from admonishing the diminutive female, instead accelerating his pace, with Gwen, Ilara, and Felicia following in his wake. On the day of the coronation, the proceedings commenced in the morning. Your Highness, the members of the Moonlight Pack, along with your brother, have arrived. Upon entering Ilara's room, Jenna offered a slight bow, a gesture of respect and courtesy. You may rise. It is imperative that the relevant parties be apprised of the fact that I will be joining them in the near future. The young ladies have only a few tasks remaining on their agenda. Ilara replied, as she was still having her hair styled. The response was affirmative. The domestic worker acknowledged this observation, and then promptly exited the room, discreetly casting a glance over her shoulder. The other maids had not yet completed her preparation, but her inherent beauty was already evident. She smiled, closing the door behind her. Shortly after being informed of her imminent arrival to the living room, where the watchers and Lucienne were waiting, the door opened. Upon entering the chamber, the queen of the werewolves, who was elegantly and attractively attired, materialized. In response, all the men promptly rose to their feet and bowed. It must be noted that the act in question was not, as previously indicated, a necessary action. Ilara promptly endeavored to halt the advance. Throughout her history with her pack, she had always been treated with a certain level of deference by her pack members when in their presence. However, when she was in private and saw them in a more intimate setting, they still demonstrated a profound level of respect by bowing before her. Subsequent to the coronation, they were no longer inclined to bow, irrespective of the circumstances or location of their encounters. It is evident that, in addition to the customary requirements, Ilara continued to be treated in a manner consistent with prior practices, thereby providing a measure of solace. It is noteworthy that no reproach was directed towards her for her failure to disclose the truth. Despite her attempts to offer an apology, the group did not accept it, and instead expressed their contentment in her return. The subjects expressed profound remorse for their inability to prevent her kidnapping on the day of her separation from them. You may rise. Ilara exhaled as she issued the directive, otherwise, they would not raise their heads. The subject's appearance was lauded as being aesthetically pleasing. Lucien articulated his sentiments prior to embracing her. Lucien's arrival at the academy, which occurred 4 years prior, was immediately followed by an act of contrition for a previous misstep. This misstep, which involved the removal of a telephone by his father, led to an apology from Lucien to his sister. She chose to pardon him, cognizant of the impact her parents had exerted on them during their childhood, and did not allow it to affect her emotional well-being. Subsequent to that period, she assumed responsibility for the care of her brother, thereby fostering a close bond between the two that persisted throughout the years. Fortunately, her brother had opted to pursue a career as a pack doctor, a decision that ran counter to his parents' wishes and followed in his father's footsteps. His academic journey was protracted, extending beyond the expected timeline, ensuring his proximity to her throughout this period. Lucien released Alara, once more casting his gaze upon his sister, whose beauty was unmistakable. Upon ascertaining her identity as the Queen, subsequent to her confidential disclosure and personal encounter with the King, which, it should be noted, proved to be the most disconcerting encounter, she appeared to be an optimal candidate for the role of Luna for all the Pax. Upon observing the subject dressed in a grey, sparkling gown and adorned with a tiara, it can be concluded that she was effectively assuming the role of a queen. Alpha, you look beautiful. The male subjects also expressed their approval, citing her physical attractiveness as a primary factor in their decision. The subject's alpha status was consistently characterized by an aesthetic appeal, and the recent enhancement in this domain is particularly noteworthy. Expressions of gratitude are extended. She expressed her gratitude to the men who had agreed to serve as her escorts for the day. The inquiry posed sought to ascertain whether the individual had partaken in the first meal of the day. Alara inquired, expressing concern, that the preparations were taking a slightly extended amount of time and the men had already been waiting for a considerable period, particularly given their early morning arrival. Negative. I could eat a piglet. Zayn, exhibiting no sense of embarrassment, conceded. The aforementioned statement is a classic example of a joke that has been told so often that it has become outdated and no longer amusing. Ronan articulated his sentiments, his tone conveying a subtle hint of exasperation as he addressed Zayn. It has been determined that the aforementioned statement is not accurate. The individual in question has been known to express mirth in response to the subject of discussion. In response, Zayn promptly initiated a defense. Undoubtedly, she would. She is bound to you, and she has no option but to. Ronan spoke in a monotone tone, and Zayn, already beginning to raise his voice, was visibly upset. Very well, let us proceed. It is imperative that all parties involved maintain composure, as today holds great significance for Her Highness. It is imperative that you comport yourselves as proper watchers, at least for the present day. Jackson exhaled, interrupting the two before their exchange could escalate. The location in question is the outdoor garden of the Royal Palace, specifically in the vicinity of the ballroom. Lyra exhibited signs of restlessness, her mood noticeably dampened by Karen's insistence that she remain outside until the commencement of the Queen's ceremony. The man exhibited a clear aversion to proximity to the woman, and consequently, he had explicitly instructed her not to enter the hall until it was absolutely necessary. Despite her initial reluctance, she acquiesced to his demand that she step outside, albeit with the caveat that he would block her credit card if she did not comply. She exhibited a pronounced display of agitation, characterized by pacing and intermittent foot stomping. Additionally, she periodically retrieved flowers from a nearby bush and proceeded to disrupt their natural state. It is imperative to cease any actions that might result in harm to the flowers. It has been reported that Her Highness holds them in high regard. Would you be amenable to the prospect of our being disciplined? Myrna inquired about the matter. The beta female exhibited signs of annoyance when her daughter compelled her to accompany her outside. Who will be aware of this? Everyone's busy. The subject articulated her sentiments with a pronounced expression of displeasure, punctuated by the act of severing another floral specimen. Lyra, it is possible that someone might still observe us. Myrna issued a warning to her daughter, yet she did not anticipate that her daughter would heed her counsel. The maternal figure's contemporary function in relation to her offspring closely mirrors the maternal figure's function she previously exhibited in relation to the previous Luna, Cynthia. It was imperative for her to acquiesce to her daughter's demands, as the latter behaved with her in a manner that lacked even the modicum of respect that is customary between a mother and child. In the event that her daughter issued a directive for her to arrive at a specified location, she was obligated to comply. Similarly, if her daughter issued a directive for her to depart from a particular location, she was also compelled to adhere to this instruction. Ilara's behavior towards her mother was unprecedented. The child had always been obedient and compliant. The absence of communication with her eldest daughter was a source of profound despondency for her. A comparison of the behaviors exhibited by Lyra and Ilara reveals significant disparities. Her interest in the respect that accompanies the role of a mother of a moonlight had waned. The subject's primary objective was to establish a periodic relationship with the child, primarily for the purpose of monitoring her well-being. However, the subject was unaware of the child's current location and lacked any means of establishing communication with her. The phenomenon under consideration is indicative of a scenario in which the human condition is such that the value and appreciation of another individual is only realized in the aftermath of their absence. Please cease your incessant nagging. It is evident that this is the extent of your activities. The decision to bring the aforementioned individual with me was made in order to avoid an awkward situation that would have otherwise ensued had I exited alone. It is imperative to cease the incessant verbalizations and maintain a position at the periphery, in accordance with the expectations of a competent beta tester. Lyra articulated a stream of caustic rhetoric, finding herself unable to articulate her thoughts to the man in question due to his potential withholding of the financial resources in question. Consequently, she sought to articulate her frustrations to an alternative individual. Myrna ceased to speak and adopted a position to the side, wiping a small tear from the corner of her eye. The queen's mood and curiosity to see anyone had been dampened by her daughter. Lyra proceeded to dislodge another flower from its stem with considerable force, causing it to fall to the ground. She was on the verge of selecting another specimen from the bush when she became aware of an exceedingly alluring fragrance. With her pupils dilating, she rapidly followed the olfactory trail, coming to a halt when her gaze met that of a gentleman whose pulchritude surpassed even that of Karen. The tall man had ventured outside for a respite when he became aware of the presence of his companion. He promptly proceeded in the direction from which the scent emanated. Upon observing her ocular expression, he articulated the word "made" in a deliberate manner, and she reciprocated with a similar verbalization. The subject's eyes exhibited a glistening response upon viewing the alpha-ranked male, whose aura indicated an overwhelming sense of power. With a slight smile, she attempted to approach the man who was still a few feet away, perceiving him as a potential source of assistance. Despite the absence of romantic love on the part of Karen, it was presumed that her partner would accept her in her entirety. The subject's ability to obtain both love and power was of particular interest, as was the possibility of having a male partner who would cater to her needs. The subject's compatibility with the alpha male archetype was evident, as outlined in the prophecy, and the subject's decision to wait for a more opportune moment to engage in romantic relationships would have been in alignment with the expectations set forth in the prophecy. As long as she was able to locate him, the situation remained acceptable. The man's mood was completely ruined when he saw another alpha male's mark on her neck, despite the fact that she smiled slightly at him. The mark was discernible due to the low-cut nature of Lyra's dress, a deliberate choice that highlighted her status as a Luna. He had endured a lifetime of anticipation for the arrival of his prospective partner. This anticipation had even led him to maintain a distance from his childhood companion, for whom he had developed a profound affection. He believed that maintaining this distance would ensure a fair outcome for his future partner. However, the latter had not reciprocated these sentiments. She had instead chosen to engage in a romantic relationship with another male. The subject's perception of the woman was immediate and unambiguous, allowing him to form a comprehensive initial impression. The inquiry posed sought to ascertain the subject's appellation. The man, whose facial expression was devoid of emotion, inquired when the woman, maintaining a distance of several inches, endeavored to conceal her dismay, in order to ascertain the information he sought. "Lyra Quinn, and you?" Lyra delicately brushed her eyelashes, as if momentarily forgetting that her surname was no longer Quinn. "It is hereby declared that Lyra Quinn is not to be considered as a potential mate and future Luna for Justin Colt, the Alpha of the Blue Moon Pack." The Alpha immediately expressed his intention to return directly to his pack following the ceremony. His childhood friend's friend had previously rebuffed her advances for a woman who closely resembled the one before him, thereby allowing him to openly pursue her. The subject indicated a clear reluctance to proceed with the proposed course of action. Lyra wept, her heart shattering into a million fragments as she collapsed to the ground. She inhaled sharply, attempting to discern the rationale behind his decision to rebuff her, given his initial enthusiasm. The female subject is hereby instructed to accept the rejection in the present moment. Justin articulated, employing his elevated werewolf voice. Lyra was compelled to comply with the command, despite her internal struggle to refrain from speaking. Upon reaching a definitive conclusion regarding the rejection, the individual pivoted and began to depart. "Why?" she inquired with a heightened level of audibility. The question posits the notion of whether an individual would ever consent to a romantic partnership that has been endorsed by another person. The man stated this without turning around as he walked away, displaying a lack of concern for the woman who was struggling to catch her breath due to the rejection. "This outcome is not equitable. This outcome is inequitable." She stated that, as her mother approached her, she fell to the ground, and her mother attempted to assist her in rising. The woman had previously counseled Lyra to await her destined partner, yet her daughter remained steadfast in her devotion to Karen, disregarding her mother's counsel. In fact, she had persuaded her to relinquish any hope of anticipation. TCH, TCH, TCH. The day is marked by the coronation of Her Highness. It is not considerate of you to emit such loud sounds in proximity to the garden. As Lyra approached the ground on her broom from above, a diminutive witch issued a reprimand. "You!" Myrna experienced a sudden jolt of recognition when she caught sight of the witch, who appeared quite familiar to her. Lyra's countenance also exhibited a visible shift, her features betraying a state of perturbation and fury. He responded, his mind processing the implications of the situation. The effervescent witch articulated in a hushed tone, seemingly seeking to ascertain the nature of Myrna's predicament. The woman in question has been identified as the sorceress who, according to local lore, foretold the future of the young girl's daughter. Myrna arrived at the realization that the memory of the witch who possessed the ability to predict the future would be indelibly etched in her consciousness. Her appearance was so unconventional that it would be difficult to overlook. "Am I?" Esme inquired, inclining her head. The woman's identity remained uncertain to her, but the inquiry served to dispel the ambiguity surrounding her identity. Her predictive abilities, hitherto limited to Alara's sister, suggested that the duet from the tragedy play before her pertained to her own family. "She is?" Lyra inquired, her gaze fixed intently on her mother. The unexpected revelation caused her to temporarily lose sight of her previous experiences, as her anger towards the witch intensified. "One's existence is the foundation of all that exists. You predicted that my life would be both beautiful and accomplished as a Luna." The subject vocalized an exclamation once more, and her mother signaled her assent by nodding her head, thereby confirming that Esme was indeed a practitioner of witchcraft. "And?" Esme inquired, maintaining composure in the face of the werewolf's displeasure. "The subject has been accused of dishonesty and of lacking authenticity," Lyra vociferated, attributing her misfortune to her. "I am not." In the initial phase of the experiment, an alpha approached the subject, and it was determined that the subject and the alpha were mates. "Had he accepted you, you would have had a beautiful life." "How did I lie?" Esme articulated her thoughts with an effortless fluidity, as if it was the most innate and spontaneous expression of her thoughts. It is evident that she had predicted the future of Lyra, with the intention of preventing Alara from experiencing an alternate life trajectory, one that deviates from her preordained fate. Ultimately, the decision-making authority was entrusted to the women on the ground. It is evident that she did not compel them to engage in the actions that they had previously undertaken. Even if Lyra had not created these problems and had instead waited for her rightful mate, it is likely that she would have devised another solution to prevent Alara from becoming Karen's Luna. It is evident that she would not have compelled Lyra to intervene, irrespective of Lyra's werewolf status. "Your mother inquired about your fate, and I informed her that you would have an alpha mate as your partner, though I did not specify the identity of that individual." The aforementioned statements were made in full awareness of the veracity of the information provided. It was the individual in question who determined her own trajectory. Esme articulated her perspective with a sigh, providing further elaboration as Lyra and Myrna found themselves at a loss for words. It is important to note that, in general, when a witch becomes aware of the future of another individual with whom she has a close relationship, she generally chooses not to share this information with that individual. This is due to the fact that individuals who are aware of their future are likely to be influenced by it and perhaps even alter it, thereby affecting its quality. Therefore, it is unthinkable that a practitioner of witchcraft would disclose future events to their closest associates. This principle should similarly apply to the parents of the individual in question, despite the fact that the aforementioned divination was provided to them. The decision to inform the subject of the matter in question was arguably unwarranted. Moreover, even if I were to divulge this information, the ultimate decision would still reside with you. Esme stated her intentions and proceeded expeditiously, directing the broom toward the ballroom, her actions accompanied by the olfactory sensation of a familiar bubblegum scent. It is noteworthy that the mother and daughter, having just regained their footing, elected not to elaborate further on the events that had transpired. The question must be posed, what purpose would such a course of action serve? Even if Lyra desired to engage in a dispute with Myrna regarding her unfortunate life circumstances, what would be the potential benefits of such an endeavor? It appeared that the sister and her had similar life circumstances. Ultimately, both individuals experienced rejection from their respective romantic partners. The sound of 3 automobiles coming to a halt at the entrance to the expansive ballroom abruptly interrupted her ruminations, causing her to recognize that she was still in a place where she was not permitted to dwell on her troubles. The potential for social disapproval, as indicated by laughter, was a salient concern. The subject's relationship with the other Lunas was already characterized by a lack of positive connections. The others had not tolerated her presence since the ball 5 years ago, when she had demanded a date from His Highness. Her haughtiness and arrogance were not well received by the other students, and she did not have a single Luna friend. The inquiry posed sought to ascertain whether the individual in question was indeed Her Highness. Myrna exclaimed, grasping Lyra's arm, which prompted Lyra to glance toward the vehicles. The 9 men exited the vehicles, their auras radiating in alarming intensity. The alpha-ranked werewolves, attired in formal black attire, bore a striking resemblance to a magnificent yet ominous painting. Subsequent to their descent, one of the alphas proceeded to open the rear door of the median vehicle. Concurrently, a diminutive, slender hand became visible from within the vehicle. The werewolf exhibited a slight curvature of the spine as it grasped the woman's hand, facilitating her egress from the vehicle. Due to the fact that the woman was wearing a veil that obscured her face, Lyra and her mother were unable to make a positive identification of the individual. Additionally, their vantage point was quite distant. However, they were able to ascertain with a reasonable degree of certainty that the woman was indeed the queen. Upon her return to terra firma, the other 8 men also bowed their heads, and only raised them when she gestured for them to stand. Maintaining the same bowed posture, approximately 12 maids were waiting in the front to receive the person. They raised their heads as well when she gestured with her hand. Subsequently, in an organized manner, 4 men proceeded in front of the woman, while 4 men proceeded behind her. Concurrently, the individual who had assisted her in boarding the vehicle maintained a firm grip on her hand, providing guidance and assistance as she traversed the stairs, with the attendants following closely behind. The aforementioned event was characterized by an extensive procession of individuals. A mere minute or 2 elapsed from the moment the woman appeared to the moment she disappeared behind the opened doors, and proceeded to traverse the hallways. However, this brief interval was sufficient to induce a state of profound astonishment in both Lyra and her mother. The queen radiated an aura of royalty. Indeed, the king had concealed her to insulate her from the external environment. The subjects rapidly transitioned from their contemplation to a hastened progression toward the rear exit, which led to the garden. They proceeded back to the ballroom to await the commencement of the ceremony. It was imperative that they not only attend, but also show proper deference to the 2 royals. It was not realized that Lucienne had also disembarked from one of the vehicles, as the group had been so entranced by the sight of the queen that they had failed to observe their surroundings more closely. The following is a list of key elements that must be included in any discussion of this subject. The Moonlight Pack concluded their assigned task by escorting the queen to the waiting room, where she was to convene with Theron. Theron had preceded the queen to assess the preparations. Jackson's smile faded as he released Alara's hand, which Theron accepted with evident relief. Subsequently, the men inclined their heads and exited the waiting room to proceed to their respective seats within the ballroom. "Greetings, confident wolf." A voice emanated from the rear, coinciding precisely with Jackson's imminent entry into the ballroom accompanied by his companions. "Greetings, vexing adolescent sorceress." In response to Esm's greeting, Jackson emitted a sigh. You. It is difficult to comprehend the rationale behind the decision to address one's companion in such a manner. Additionally, it should be noted that I take umbrage when my age is mentioned." She immediately retorted, visibly upset, with her cheeks exhibiting a pouting expression. "Indeed, that is the case. This assertion is made towards the end of the aforementioned passage. There, do not be upset." Jackson then proceeded to coax the infant, employing a gentle petting gesture directed at her cranium. He derived a certain amount of enjoyment from provoking the ire of the witch, as his partner appeared most resplendent when she inflated her round cheeks. The inquiry posed pertains to the duration of the subject's continued use of the appellation little. Esm's emotional state was evident as she expressed her displeasure, then proceeded to embrace Jackson and bestow a kiss upon his lips. Her actions prompted a flinch from him, as Esm rapidly descended, ran a hand through her curly hair to dislodge the strands from her face, and proceeded toward the ballroom, disregarding his presence. It is evident that the individual in question is currently preoccupied with a minor. Zane stated that the men had all along been near Jackson, observing the interaction, with the rest of the men emitting whistles in agreement. The subject was instructed to cease the activity. Jackson issued the order, experiencing a sense of embarrassment as a subtle red hue appeared on his ears. Subsequently, after placing his hand over his mouth to suppress a slight cough, he hastily entered the ballroom to pursue Esm. The following is a list of key elements that must be included in any discussion of this subject. In the ballroom, the attendees took their seats as the attendants indicated that the king and queen would be arriving shortly. The collective settled into their seats, yet faint murmurs could be discerned throughout the vast ballroom, which was designed to accommodate thousands of individuals. The subject's anticipation regarding the impending encounter with the Queen was palpable, as they had been awaiting this moment for an extended period. Your arrival is finally observed. It is evident that the individual in question consistently exhibits behaviors that are deemed unacceptable and that have a tendency to result in feelings of embarrassment. Kindly take your seat without delay, as Her Highness's arrival is imminent. Karen articulated his displeasure as Lyra expeditiously assumed a seated posture. She refrained from responding to his verbal barrage, as such interactions were a recurring phenomenon. Instead, she directed her gaze toward the door from which the king and queen were expected to enter. Myrna also took her seat near Lyra and her husband, with whom she also did not have a good relationship these days. The man had been influenced by his wife, and as a result, their lives had been adversely impacted. Consequently, he was experiencing profound frustration and attributed the blame to Myrna for the perceived misfortunes in their lives. Previously, he had a positive relationship with Karen's father. However, under the current leadership of Karen, the situation has deteriorated significantly. He was also on the verge of relinquishing his position to another individual, a development that would not unfold in accordance with his dream of bequeathing it to his son. Lucien's decision to pursue his professional aspirations, despite not having obtained their consent, exemplifies a departure from traditional familial structures. All rise and bow. Their Highnesses are now in attendance." The two bouncers vociferated, thereby engendering an immediate and complete cessation of all audible activity within the room. As the crowd awaited the commencement of the event, the doormen remained stationary. After a brief interval, each individual proceeded to approach their respective sides of the doors and, in unison, opened them. "Are you prepared, my dear?" Theron inquired of Alara, as the door opened, whether she would be so kind as to kiss her hand. She inhaled deeply, nodded her head in affirmation, and the veil, which had previously obscured her countenance, was now lifted, as she was about to be formally presented. Her identity was no longer subject to concealment. Theron then smiled gently at her and guided her through the doors and towards the two thrones positioned at the forefront of the ballroom. He assisted the diminutive woman in assuming a seated position, subsequently taking a seat himself, and together they placed their hands on the armrests. It is evident that Theron's predilection for holding her hand led to the strategic design of the thrones. The central armrest of both thrones was meticulously crafted to be identical, thereby ensuring that there was no possibility for the hands to be positioned side by side. Consequently, he readily extended his large hand to gently envelop her small one, thereby offering a reassuring gesture and soothing her emotional state. Once both parties had been seated in a state of sufficient comfort, Theron permitted the individuals within the expansive chamber to elevate their heads. "You may rise." Theron's voice resonated powerfully within the ballroom, reverberating throughout the space before anyone dared to glance toward the front. A collective exhalation of astonishment reverberated throughout the assembly as the assembled werewolves beheld the concealed monarch of their race. Adorned in a resplendent grey gown that glistened with hints of golden illuminations, the queen's countenance, though diminutive, exuded an unrivaled elegance that rivaled Theron's own nobility. Complementing her majestic appearance was a diminutive diamond tiara, contributing to an overall aura of regal splendor. It is evident that she was a perfect match for the man positioned on her left. Amidst the werewolves, 4 werewolves were visibly taken aback, though for reasons that differed from those experienced by their counterparts. The sudden appearance of Alara at the opposite end of the chamber, seated regally on the throne, was an unexpected sight. Their cognitive processes continued to be characterized by a state of internal turmoil, and despite their efforts, they found themselves unable to grasp the rationale behind her presence on the throne, a position reserved exclusively for the queen. It is imperative that the werewolf race acknowledge its newly appointed leader, Alara Wolf. Theron employed her alpha voice, yet the werewolves were only able to glimpse her. This was, in essence, a means of demonstrating her superiority over them. This practice did not align with the established customs of the era, as the queens of that time were not held in the same esteem as the king and therefore lacked the authority to overrule him. However, Alara possessed the same rank, thereby rendering her capable of performing the same actions. This revelation provoked a state of perplexity among the werewolves. The established protocol dictated that the king was to command the subjects to prostrate themselves once more, whereupon the queen would grant them permission to stand upright. In this manner, she would also receive their obedience. However, it is necessary to consider the purpose behind the king's use of the alpha voice. It is evident that the ability to elicit such a response at this late stage is no longer a possibility. "You may rise." Alara's voice was audible within the ballroom, although she also employed her alpha voice. Her tone was more dulcet than that of the king. The werewolves immediately rose at her command, creating another wave of gasps inside the ballroom. The prerogative to overrule the monarch's decree is contingent upon the queen's possession of the same rank as the king. It is permissible to take a seat at this time. Please feel at ease, as we are in a private setting and are not being observed by family members. Theron then proceeded to issue instructions as the group assumed their seats. The werewolves of Alara's former pack, who exhibited robotic-like movements, proceeded to occupy their designated seats. Myrna found herself in a state of emotional distress, rendering her unable to articulate her thoughts or engage in further reflection. Her husband shared this state of emotional paralysis. Alara had previously established a romantic partnership, but now she was depicted as the consort of the monarch. She also possessed an equivalent rank to that of the monarch. Neither of them could comprehend the events that had transpired. The question thus arises as to how she came to be the king's mate. Karen experienced a state of acute verbal incapacity, nevertheless, he endeavored to suppress further contemplation of the incident by firmly closing his eyes. He recognized that his ability to influence the situation was severely limited. On the occasion of the ball, long ago, he had never divulged to anyone the manner in which the king had confronted him at that time. However, now that he beheld Alara as the queen, he could comprehend why the king exhibited such possessive tendencies towards her. The precise circumstances surrounding its genesis remained obscure, however, the futility of contemplating the matter was evident. Lyra was the only one who had not yet accepted the situation, and she was exhibiting signs of distress, such as digging her fingernails into the palms of her hands to the point of bleeding. The question has been raised as to why Alara consistently received the most favorable treatment. Her actions and decisions from her childhood until the present moment have been characterized by a consistent commitment to excellence. Despite her attempts to usurp her sister's position, including the attempted theft of her partner, Alara emerged victorious. The underlying rationale for this phenomenon warrants further examination. As the alphas of the most prominent packs pledged their allegiance before the newly installed queen, the passage of time was expeditious. It is evident that an allegiance of this magnitude is not one that would be extended by Karen's pack or other lesser packs. The sheer multitude of packs necessitated a stringent protocol. Only the 100 most significant packs were permitted to approach the queen for presentation. The remaining packs were relegated to a distant observation, strictly forbidden from any form of communication with the queen. Following the conclusion of the loyalty oaths, Theron articulated a collective sentiment on behalf of all present. You have encountered your queen, and in the future you will see her again. Regrettably, she has decided to withdraw from further engagement for the remainder of the evening, thereby omitting her participation from the subsequent dinner event. It should be noted that my acquaintance is currently carrying the heir to the throne, and as such, I kindly request that you exercise understanding. It is my hope that you enjoy a pleasant evening and that a selection of delectable culinary creations has been prepared for your enjoyment. Theron addressed the werewolves, or more precisely, apprised them of the situation, and had already risen to his feet, taking Alara's hand in his own, after once again shocking the individuals present in the room. Alara's parents swiftly rose to their feet and hastily traversed the distance between the tables to reach their daughter. At this juncture, Lyra remained silent. In light of her erroneous selection of a life, what actions could she possibly take at this juncture, aside from the continuation of said erroneous life? This would be her retribution for desiring that which was never intended to be within her possession. Some might argue that this was a minor form of retribution for her actions. However, it is important to consider the broader implications of such actions. Living a life near a person who does not love you, surrounded by people who only flatter you for the mask you wear each day, having things that no longer bring you joy, carrying on each moment in this way, and seeing the person you scorned having the life you could only dream of, are these not already significant punishments? Upon arriving at the vicinity of the front of the ballroom, Ilara and Theron were on the verge of exiting through the door when they encountered an impediment, preventing them from reaching the exit. This obstruction was caused by the men who had previously escorted Ilara and her pack into the ballroom. At this point, the men were aware of the manner in which her parents had treated her. Lucien had informed them of this fact, as he had become acquainted with them. Consequently, they would not allow her parents to come near her. This was particularly evident in Zane's case, as she experienced a sense of remorse for having disclosed her location to them, which prompted her parents to visit the academy in search of Ilara. "Please move out of the way. Ilara, my dear." The mother placed a call, her eyes brimming with tears as she sought a fleeting glimpse of her daughter. In this instance, Myrna experienced genuine tears of remorse, recognizing the depth of wrongdoing she had committed against Ilara. It had always been perceived that Lyra exhibited characteristics analogous to those of a genuine Luna, and she had long held the belief that she was without fault. However, upon observing Ilara seated upon the throne, it became evident that she did not appear out of place. The young lady whom she had anticipated would at the very least identify a suitable partner for marriage, the offspring whom she had never anticipated would possess any exceptional qualities, transpired to be the ideal candidate for leadership over an entire race. At that moment, however, that was not the most pressing concern. Her primary objective was to converse with Ilara, as she was overcome with a profound sense of loss for her daughter and a deep realization of the indispensable role that the eldest child invariably played in their lives. It has been established that members of lesser packs are not entitled to address Her Highness directly. It is imperative that you return to your seat immediately, for failure to do so will result in disciplinary action. Jackson provided a definitive response. "She is my daughter, and I simply wish to see her. I simply wish to converse with her." Myrna concurred, and her husband concurred as well. "I apologize, but I must inform you that the individual in question is the queen of the werewolf race. Only if Her Highness grants permission to speak with you, may you engage in discourse with her." Jackson once again denied the allegations, exhibiting no remorse for the affected parties. Myrna ultimately succumbed to tears, expressing her profound bewilderment regarding Ilara's decision to initiate communication with them, given the long-standing history of mistreatment she had endured at their hands. It is highly improbable that she would ever engage in such an act. It is evident that the opportunity to rectify their transgressions would be unattainable. This punishment entailed the deliberate exclusion of the daughter from their lives, despite her profound affection for them. The individual who had never disobeyed them would be the one they would never reach again. Ilara and Theron discerned their parents' voices emanating from beyond the threshold, yet neither of them exhibited any inclination to rotate their bodies in the direction of the auditory stimuli. At this juncture, Ilara would be incapable of believing the sincerity of the cries. This is in contrast to the past, when such a practice was not observed. The question therefore arises as to why such a change should occur at present. The query posed to the subject was whether they wished to return. Theron inquired in a delicate manner. Despite his awareness of her probable refusal, he posed the question to the diminutive female, thereby granting her the autonomy to determine her response. The subject's close family members are limited to the subject and their offspring. She articulated her sentiments with the same degree of gentleness. He smiled at the woman, planting a kiss on her lips, before resuming their journey. This was indeed the case, as the family unit was comprised solely of the three aforementioned individuals. The subject's use of the title Your Highness is indicative of a regal or noble status. The tall, handsome man made a demand of the beautiful woman, maintaining a firm grasp on her. Maintained in a position of force that did not inflict significant harm, yet was sufficient to restrain her, the woman exhibited a reluctance to direct her gaze toward the man. He possessed a remarkable ability to persuade her to acquiesce to his desires, and this efficacy stemmed from his ability to gaze into her blue eyes, which now, in defiance, she averted. The subject's persistent use of the appellation Your Highness is worthy of note. He reiterated his assertion, this time in a more subdued tone. I refuse to do so. Given the name Theron has been provided, it is to be used henceforth. It is imperative to relinquish control, as the children's imminent arrival is a matter of great concern. The woman, whose appearance was reminiscent of a fairy, expressed her reluctance to acquiesce to his demands. The prospect of their arrival is of no consequence. It is imperative to emphasize that the act of embracing is executed with the utmost care and caution. The absence of physical proximity to the object of affection was a source of profound emotional distress. The separation from you has been protracted, to a considerable extent. Have you also been longing for my presence? Theron articulated with a raspy voice. The countenance of the handsome man bore an unmistakable expression of sadness. Very well, very well. Hug me as you would like. Ilara relented, and surrendered to the embrace, eliciting a profound sense of satisfaction from Theron, who responded by embracing her with increased fervor. Very well. I would like to express my profound gratitude, but I must inquire, will you be addressing me as Your Highness? Theron's repeated inquiry was indicative of her willingness to consider alternative approaches, suggesting a degree of flexibility in her position. I am not in the mood for jokes. I will refer to you as Theron, and that will be the final decision. She articulated her sentiments with marked severity, yet she did not displace herself from her position. The man's persistent requests for her to call him, reminiscent of a bygone era before their romantic connection, underscore his nostalgic recollections and emotional attachment. Nevertheless, she demonstrated unwavering determination. She was cognizant of his thoughts. He had committed the act on numerous occasions previously. He would initiate discourse on the subject of the past, subsequently directing her to address him as Your Highness. Thereafter, he would proceed to comport himself in a manner reminiscent of royalty, issuing directives such as kissing him, embracing him, and other such actions. It would be appropriate to acknowledge the absence of emotional intimacy between us, would it not? Theron endeavored to prevail once more. You are a man of no moral integrity. You were only absent for a single hour. Despite the brevity of our separation, it is perplexing to me that I was unable to accomplish any work. Your return has exacerbated my feelings of loss, as it is difficult to fathom how I could have missed you so significantly." She elevated her head and directed her gaze at him. It is a remarkable feat that she was able to successfully complete her royal obligations in the presence of the king, who persistently sought her attention. His need for proximity and emotional connection was pronounced, even when compared to the typical behaviors exhibited by children. It is noteworthy that he was able to complete all of his obligations expeditiously, particularly given that he was closely following her on a daily basis. In fact, this is a commendable effort. I will demonstrate the extent of my audacity. He articulated his perspective with a smirk, then promptly rose to his feet and pursued the woman, who had just become aware that she had inadvertently stepped on a landmine. She had hastily retreated, having first directed an accusatory remark at him, labeling him a shameless man. "Cease immediately. I am currently engaged in a professional undertaking that demands my immediate attention." Ilara articulated her sentiments with urgency, simultaneously extending her arms in a defensive posture. A man of integrity is not concerned with external appearances or social conventions. Theron began to articulate a response, her tone marked by a hint of amusement, as she sought to identify a potential vulnerability in her opponent's argument. However, after a prolonged period of engagement, she recognized the complexity of the task before her. "Mom." The 6-year-old child, who was in excellent physical condition, initiated communication. The young lady with blue eyes exhibited a striking resemblance to Theron, extending even to her unruffled countenance, which bore a striking similarity to his own. It was evident that her mother was gradually being maneuvered towards a corner of the room, with her father making consistent progress towards her. However, she exhibited a complete lack of concern. This phenomenon transpired with such regularity that it could be considered an everyday occurrence. The response was affirmative, expressed with a degree of enthusiasm and affection. Ilara's immediate response, characterized by a sense of profound gratitude, signaled her profound relief and joy at the sight of her liberator. Despite diligent efforts, Elias's whereabouts remain unknown, and the scheduled commencement of our academic obligations is imminent. The young girl, with her curly pigtails swaying rhythmically from side to side, articulated her perspective. "It is hereby proposed that the search for the aforementioned individual be conducted in a collective manner." Ilara proffered her assistance, endeavoring to extricate herself from the grasp of the individual. "It has been posited that the individual in question is currently concealed within the confines of the garden." Theron informed the girl before Ilara had taken even one step forward. "For what purpose would he conceal himself?" Ilara inquired, her demeanor indicating a sense of perplexity and a slight relaxation of her defensive posture. "It is unclear who is responsible." In response, he maintained composure, concealing the truth. "It is imperative to ascertain how the individual could convey to the female subject that he was evading the children." Ilara perceived her twin girls as celestial beings, and she found it inconceivable that there were individuals who feared them. The two 6-year-olds were regarded as the embodiment of innocence and purity. To reiterate, at which point in the discussion did we arrive at this conclusion? He resumed his pursuit and ultimately succeeded in capturing the object of his affection. The following is a list of relevant sources that will assist in the preparation of this paper. The inquiry posed sought to ascertain the presence of the individual in question within the designated outdoor space, herein referred to as the garden. A query was posed to a second young girl, approximately 6 years of age, who exhibited a strong resemblance to the first subject, with the notable distinction of possessing eyes of a chocolate-colored hue. This inquiry was directed towards the subject as she departed from the confines of her parents' office. The response was affirmative. The first girl replied, already moving through the hallway, skipping away. As I previously indicated, the presence of the individual in question has been confirmed. The second girl articulated this sentiment as she proceeded with her sister in a light-hearted manner. The subject had previously demonstrated awareness of this fact. The first girl articulated her perspective in a composed manner, her pigtails oscillating rhythmically. Then, the second girl inquired with a sense of curiosity, tilting her head to the side to observe her sister's countenance. The subject indicated that they had initially considered saving their mother, but ultimately decided against it. The initial girl's assertion was perceived as self-evident. This response is indicative of a state of cognitive dissonance. The second girl confirmed this observation. Despite her initial confusion regarding the necessity of her mother's rescue, she refrained from further inquiry. The blue-eyed woman gazed upon her sister, who exhibited a certain degree of naivete, and exhaled with a sigh. The subject's twin sister exhibited a physical resemblance to their mother and displayed a certain degree of naivete. It was imperative that the subject assume responsibility for the well-being of their twin sister in the future. The following is a list of relevant sources that will assist in the preparation of this paper. Upon arriving at the indoor garden, the two girls proceeded to open the double doors and enter the structure. A visual analysis of the two subjects revealed that, when positioned in close proximity to each other, they exhibited an endearing appearance. Their attire, a uniform pink color, further contributed to their visual appeal. The subjects' hairstyles, characterized by curly pigtails, further enhanced their youthful and endearing demeanor. Based on Ilara's initial assessment, the subjects evoked the image of two diminutive angels, lacking only the distinctive wings often associated with such celestial beings. Elias. The two individuals vocalized their concerns in unison, however, their appeal went unanswered. Elias, we are aware of your presence. We can smell your fear. The woman with blue eyes and a charming demeanor emitted a light-hearted expression as she conversed with caution. The subject of this study expressed a lack of trepidation, stating, "I am not afraid, you can't smell any fear." The man rose to his feet, clearly visible from behind a bush. It became evident that, regrettably, evasion was unfeasible for the individual in question, who, for the sake of convenience, referred to the two entities in question as demons. Correct, indeed. Then let us engage in play. The girl with blue eyes immediately responded, her body exhibiting a state of heightened alertness. We are unable to do so, Your Highness. You have classes now. Elias, in an attempt to embody the qualities of a true pedagogue, articulated his perspective. It was his professional responsibility to oversee the instruction of the two young women. He had endeavored to extricate himself from this situation, but unfortunately, he had been unsuccessful. It is evident that if the relevant parties had possessed this knowledge beforehand, they would have exercised better judgment and refrained from engaging in the recreational activity known as hide and seek. The diminutive female child, possessed of eyes of a chocolate hue, delivered the following statement while displaying a smile. Your Highnesses, I propose that we begin with the academic activities and subsequently engage in recreation. All right? Elias inquired in a deliberate manner, endeavoring to maintain a friendly facade. Negative. The proposal is to initiate the activity at the earliest possible moment. On a previous occasion, you indicated your willingness to participate, yet you subsequently departed from the location during the final minutes of the session. You provided false information when you stated that you were going to the bathroom, yet you did not return. The young woman with blue eyes confirmed the statement, displaying a countenance that betrayed her emotional distress. To be sure, one must consider. In the previous instance, an emergency was declared, but on this occasion, the decision has been taken to remain and participate in a more sustained manner. He rapidly deduced that if he were to continue the dialogue with the two diminutive celestial beings, he would be apprehensive that they would. The invitation was made to engage in play, an act which would be more accurately translated as no. The two girls demonstrated leadership skills through their assertive voices. The second-ranked werewolf was compelled to heed the voice. It is evident that the subject has consented to the proposed course of action. Despite his evident reluctance, he nevertheless articulated the statement involuntarily. At this juncture, let us engage in a recreational activity that involves the act of riding a horse. We, as the riders, are the ones who must be prepared to take on the challenges that lie ahead, while you, as the horses, must be ready to carry us through these trials. The girl with blue eyes articulated her statement with a smile. Your Highness, I am no longer as youthful as I once was. Perhaps we should engage in a recreational activity. Elias endeavored to alter the mindset of the twin demon, who was believed to be an angel. No, Grandpa Varek is the older one, and he permits us to engage in equestrian activities. You should participate in our activities as well. Elias appeared to be in a state of helplessness in the presence of the two individuals. It was evident that the older man had descended to a level that was beneath his usual station in order to engage with the young women. Indeed, he was the catalyst that had led to the transformation of the two young women into fallen ones. The councilman has expressed displeasure when individuals refer to him as Seth, opting instead for the name Virak, as preferred by the twins. This preference suggests a preferential treatment of the older generation, which is a salient example of a double standard. The irony of this situation is noteworthy. Theron, I would like to discuss a matter with you. Ilara began to articulate her thoughts precisely as she began to open the palace's office door. Historically, the private office of the Werewolf King, situated within the living quarters of the palace, was largely underutilized. This was due to the fact that the busy man was predominantly engaged in constant movement between the council office, the academy, and his public business life. In the contemporary era, following the discovery of the current werewolf queen and leader of the Lycans in this specific office, the royal couple has been spending the majority of their days ensuring that, despite their engagement with disparate matters, they are able to enjoy time in each other's company. All matters that did not necessitate their physical presence were addressed from this office. In the event that they were unable to assist in a particular situation, they would consider visiting other locations where their physical presence was required. The subject's presence in the office was so pronounced that it appeared to be a process of recuperation for the period during which the office had been left unused. Moreover, it can be posited that the subjects were engaged in a process of making up for the time he had been deprived of his rightful mate, as articulated by the Werewolf King. Precisely 100 years, to be precise, were also the words of the king. However, at that precise moment, the man, who appeared to perish if separated from his queen at any moment, was conspicuously absent. Despite Ilara's fondness for the aromas of lavender and wood, these scents were only barely perceptible in the atmosphere. Preliminary observations suggest that the Werewolf King, or more precisely, her husband, has been absent from this office for the entirety of the day. This phenomenon was perplexing, Ilara observed as she surveyed the scene from left to right. Theron would never change his location without informing her. Despite her absence while accompanied by her own pack, he consistently initiated communication in the morning to apprise her of his daily agenda. In the absence of explicit indication regarding his whereabouts, it could be inferred that he would adhere to his customary routine, which would include the utilization of this office as his designated place of work. This dynamic remained constant throughout the 12-year period of their relationship, with no evidence of deviation from this pattern. Ilara, who generally possessed accurate knowledge of Theron's whereabouts despite her lack of interest in his schedule, experienced a subtle emotional disturbance in this specific circumstance. Her emotional state deteriorated further as she drew nearer to Theron's desk, where she discovered a diminutive note positioned atop it. The man had not provided her with information regarding his whereabouts. The note was merely a manifestation of emotional distress, for lack of a more precise term. I am currently engaged in professional obligations outside of the palace. I will return once I have completed them. The timing of this occurrence remains undisclosed at this time. It is evident that the subject in question has not evinced any interest in acquiring this information. She detached the note from the surface of the mahogany and approached it more closely to her face to read it again. Despite her lycanthropic perception, which enabled her to discern the minutest of particles adhering to the note composed by Theron, she found herself unable to accept the veracity of the inscription. This was despite the fact that she did not require the use of her vision to decipher the text, and that the document was not brought into closer proximity with her eyes. The subject did not disclose the location to which he had traveled, nor did he inform the female subject of his intended return time following the determination of the necessary duration of his absence. Notably, he asserted that the female subject's awareness of his whereabouts was not required, given her apparent lack of concern. If this was not a tantrum, then she truly lacked an adequate understanding of what a more appropriate example for a tantrum would be. Even their young daughters, who were already 7 years old, did not behave in the manner that Theron was displaying at that precise moment. It is worth noting that the subject's outburst may have originated approximately 1 week prior. Despite maintaining a professional relationship in their workplace, Theron's behavior exhibited a notable shift. He no longer engaged in physical closeness with her during sleep, and their communication during office interactions underwent a gradual decline. The catalyst for Theron's cold demeanor was not something she could discern. However, it became evident that the situation was beginning to escalate. It is possible that the outburst was merely a temporary emotional episode, but she could not predict whether Theron's mood would continue to deteriorate. A pertinent question to pose is whether the relationship could withstand the eventuality of a diminution in affection from the male partner. Ilara's heartbeat accelerated noticeably at the thought, and even Sable experienced a sense of restlessness within her mind. The profound and unconditional attraction felt by the two individuals towards one another would persist indefinitely. However, this attraction would not stem from conscious volition, but rather from an almost instinctual biological imperative. It would be a physiological response, driven by the physical needs of their bodies rather than by their own deliberate actions. It is evident that she had developed romantic sentiments toward Theron even before they became aware of their mutual compatibility. For her, the most salient aspect was the emotional bond she shared with the other party. In the event that Theron's affection for her was beginning to wane, what course of action should she pursue? A few hours later, the residence of Elias and Vera was reached. "My queen, how may I be of service?" Elias inquired about the purpose of the visit. His companion, Vera, and Alara had developed a close friendship. However, Vera typically assumed the role of the visitor to Alara at the royal residence. It was a rare occurrence for the queen to visit their home, and it was almost impossible for him to be the one sought out, instead of his wife. Exhibiting a profound sense of despondency, Alara's demeanor conveyed an overwhelming sense of responsibility, as if the issues she was grappling with had the potential to reverberate across the entire werewolf community. Even her posture, as she sat on the couch with one foot crossed over the other, exuded formality and strain. This prompts further consideration. Elias reflected on this possibility even before Alara had the opportunity to articulate her perspective. The phenomenon of déjà vu, characterized by the perception of familiar events or situations as though they are occurring for the first time, was being experienced by the subject. "Elias, I urge you to listen closely to the following information and consider its implications thoroughly before providing a response. The fate of the royal family is contingent upon the responses provided." Alara finally initiated verbal communication, and her sharp gaze convinced Elias of the matter's severity. Notwithstanding this fact, and in spite of the concentration he ought to have demonstrated in relation to the words she articulated, Elias's mind continued to meander slightly. The subject reported experiencing a profound sense of déjà vu, as if the situation had previously occurred at some point in the past. However, this outcome should be unfeasible, given that Alara had never previously visited their residence. "My queen, please articulate your thoughts on the matter." "Regardless of the circumstances, I am committed to adhering to the directives you have set forth." In a solemn manner, he responded, endeavoring to suppress his initial reflections. Given the significance of Alara's personal visit, it was imperative for him to refrain from engaging in trivial thoughts. It was evident that this was a matter of the utmost importance. "It is imperative that I ascertain." She commenced her statement, motivated by Elias's remarks, yet she still experienced a sense of reluctance in addressing the subject. The speaker indicated that the addressee was at liberty to articulate their thoughts and sentiments. Elias reiterated his affirmation, experiencing an exacerbation of his sense of unease as time elapsed. Contrary to the visits of his companion, which were motivated by frivolous reasons, Alara's purpose in visiting would undoubtedly be significant and perilous. This provoked further reflection on the part of the individual, who found himself perplexed by the situation. The phenomenon of déjà vu, which is characterized by the sensation of having experienced a situation previously, could be attributed to Theron's previous visit. For instance, when he had come to teach him how to court Alara, and he had told Theron he would teach him how to be shameless is a term that can be used to describe the behavior of individuals who lack a sense of shame or embarrassment. Indeed, this is an accurate assessment. Elias reflected on this matter once more. This situation bore a striking resemblance to a previous occurrence, he realized. However, the inquiry persists: what is the rationale behind the voice within his mind manifesting as that of a woman? The utterance was met with a query: what? Upon entering the room with a tray bearing 3 cups of coffee, Vera expressed astonishment. It should be noted that the cups had already been placed on the floor at the time of the incident. The inquiry posed sought to ascertain the well-being of the individual in question. Elias swiftly averted his gaze, directing his attention toward his companion. He experienced concern regarding the rationale behind her abrupt dropping of the tray from her grasp. Affirmative, I am. Your Highness, what was your previous statement? Vera inquired once more, disregarding Elias, who was already at her side, examining her feet. The utterance made was, instruct me in the art of shamelessness. She reiterated the words that Elias had not fully comprehended previously, and then placed both hands on her face, as she found herself unable to observe their response to her request. Ilara's upbringing was characterized by a familial environment marked by minimal expressions of affection. Consequently, she exhibited a reserved approach in expressing her own feelings of affection. The subject was never engaged in physical contact, was never provided with adequate protection, and did not receive the warmth typically associated with familial relationships. Her brother, with whom she maintained communication, resided in the same environment as her. Despite their close relationship as siblings, he lacked the ability to express his emotions to another individual, a skill he shared with her. They engaged in reciprocal communication, inquiring about each other's well-being. Additionally, he made periodic visits to the palace, where he met with the twins. However, this was the extent of the evidence. With regard to her 2 young children, it is noteworthy that they exhibited a level of maturity that surpassed their actual age. Their comportment suggested an advanced level of maturity, which manifested in their minimal engagement with her. The only individual who would do so was Theron. However, he was the one who would carry out the act. She rarely initiated acts of embracing him, and she almost never took the initiative to kiss him herself. However, the man had been engaging in this practice consistently, and it was not clear when the woman would need to undertake it independently. Furthermore, she had already come to accept the situation as it was. She had already come to accept his feelings for her as a given. While she held him in high regard, she exhibited a deficiency in expressing affection overtly and in demonstrating her devotion. Consequently, her sole viable recourse at present was to depend on the individuals who had previously assisted Theron. By chance, she had discovered the identity of the individual who had been providing Theron with counsel on his numerous unethical actions. This revelation left her unable to articulate her thoughts. The professor in question had been held in high esteem by the young woman. She had regarded him as a role model and had looked up to him. Therefore, the extent of his shrewdness was something she could not comprehend. Initially, she found it difficult to accept this reality. However, given that the individual in question, whom she held in even higher esteem than the werewolf king, Elias, exhibited similar behaviors, it stood to reason that she might also be able to accept the actions of his closest companion. This phenomenon, often cited in popular culture, underscores the tendency for like-minded individuals to congregate. After regaining composure, she expressed a desire to seek direct explanations from Elias and to address her concerns with him. Ultimately, she felt compelled to refrain from addressing the situation openly due to feelings of embarrassment. The inquiry pertains to the rationale behind the female subject's decision to visit the male subject's residence and inquire about his potential involvement in the exploitation of Theron's vulnerability regarding the alleged theft of his initial kiss. This was an exceedingly disconcerting experience, and it would be imprudent to discuss it in any depth. Ultimately, she was compelled to adopt a policy of deliberate ignorance regarding the matter. She was obliged to feign a state of complete ignorance regarding the events that had transpired throughout her life. It is noteworthy that she had not anticipated seeking out Elias and Vera on her own initiative, particularly in light of her previous skepticism regarding the value of Elias's counsel. Despite her initial inclination, the educational endeavors undertaken with Theron had the unintended consequence of fostering a deeper connection between them. She hypothesized that if the method proved effective on one occasion, it was likely to be effective on subsequent occasions as well. "Your Highness, that..." Vera faltered, her confusion evident. Her state of agitation was so pronounced that she had resorted to using Ilara's formal designation, despite her typical practice of referring to the Queen by her personal name in more intimate settings. Ilara had requested that she do so. "Your Highness, it is my greatest aspiration to be present on the day that you seek my counsel." Elias articulated his sentiments with a discernible emotional intensity, his voice exhibiting a slight strain as he struggled to contain his enthusiasm. This enthusiasm was not shared by Ilara or Vera. Ilara was already experiencing regret regarding her choice as he was speaking. "It is with great satisfaction that I acknowledge the recognition of my accomplishments. However, it must be noted that..." He persisted in his discourse, ignoring both Vera, who was already shaking her head in a state of desperation, and Ilara, who was perplexed by his boldness. Elias did not experience trepidation regarding the possibility of her taking action against him, now that she was privy to Theron's clandestine tutelage. "If I were to impart any knowledge to you, my life would be brought to an abrupt end. Theron would be extremely displeased if I were to implant any ideas into your mind. Ultimately, I am a male individual. He would not consider it lightly if I were to speak to you about these matters." While he derived a sense of accomplishment from the acknowledgement his counsel received from the imperial couple, he placed a higher value on his own existence. It is reasonable to assume that Theron would be satisfied with the results of the lessons. However, subsequent to this incident, he would approach an attempt to strangle Elias, a man, due to the fact that Elias had engaged in discourse with his wife regarding matters of a private nature. Moreover, for counsel of this nature, my acquaintance would be a superior resource. The individual in question has been selected to serve as my apprentice, and thus, she is the first to observe the efficacy of my methods. It is reasonable to assume that she will provide guidance and direction, leading to the optimal outcome. May the discussion that follows be both productive and beneficial to all parties involved." Elias articulated his statements with alacrity, particularly in the final segment, ensuring that neither party could refute his assertions or reject his proposed resolution. He leveraged his lycanthropic capabilities in a manner that optimized their potential. This was achieved by rapidly moving away from the scene. Despite his genuine curiosity regarding the rationale behind Ilara's inclination to seek counsel from him, he found himself perplexed by her motivations. The man's profound and unrelenting affection for the woman in question has been thoroughly documented. It is therefore reasonable to hypothesize that the werewolf queen's pursuit of him was initiated by some as yet undiscovered catalyst. It was evident that he would be apprised of the situation by Vera at a later time. It is highly probable that his companion would inform him of the factors that led to Ilara's presence at their residence. Elias exited the room with such haste that Vera was unable to either contradict him or utter a word. His departure occurred in the blink of an eye, akin to the swiftness of a second-ranked werewolf. Exhaling audibly, Vera considered delaying the execution of Elias until his return home. She then proceeded to the couch and seated herself in proximity to Ilara. She had even forgotten about the broken cups that she had dropped, due to the discomfort of the situation. It is not unreasonable to assume that the subject's actions were influenced by the irresponsible behavior of her partner, who refused to take responsibility for his actions and even encouraged her to discuss his so-called shameless lessons with Ilara. This effectively forced her to recount the circumstances surrounding her courtship with her partner, which likely contributed to her erratic mental state. The situation was further exacerbated by Ilara's imminent tears. This was Vera's perception of Ilara's emotional state. The countenance, typically devoid of expression, exhibited a marked pallor, accentuated by the presence of moist red eyes and a crimson nose, indicative of her human vitality. "Ilara, what precisely transpired?" Vera inquired with a discerning air. "Theron's affection for me has waned." In response, she articulated her thoughts with measured deliberation. Expressing the acrimonious reality of the situation caused her to experience a profound sense of anguish, surpassing her initial expectations. Her heart constricted with a profound sense of sorrow. "That assertion is demonstrably false. His Highness holds you in the highest regard." Vera's cognitive processes were characterized by rapid reasoning. The swiftness of her response was attributable to two factors: the gradual cessation of tears from Ilara's eyes and the absolute certainty of her response. The werewolf king exhibited an intense and obsessive interest in Ilara. The notion of such a man rapidly altering his sentiments was utterly inconceivable. Precisely 1 month prior, he had adorned the entire palace with a profusion of roses to commemorate the birthday of his partner. The veracity of this assertion is indisputable. For the duration of the past week, he has disregarded me. It has been observed that the subject's behavior has undergone a significant change in the context of sleep. Previously, the subject exhibited an excessive level of physical affection, often to the point of causing discomfort. However, this behavior has now ceased, and the subject no longer maintains a constant physical proximity. The subject demonstrated a marked reluctance to eat in the presence of others. However, under separate circumstances, the subject exhibited no such reluctance, consuming food in an undisturbed manner both in the presence and absence of the researcher. In a recent development, the aforementioned individual has taken the initiative to communicate his whereabouts and return date, opting not to share this information with me. Vera's initial response would typically involve dismissing Ilara's concerns and attributing Theron's recent actions to a mere tantrum. However, Ilara's hoarse voice impeded her from doing so. Furthermore, Ilara's motivations appeared to be rational. In the context of a different individual, or if the individual in question were male, these matters would have been explicable. Theron, however, would never permit Ilara to have any respite. Despite the passage of a week, he remained cold toward her. It is implausible that she would entertain such a notion, as Theron's profound affection for his partner is an inviolable assumption. He had patiently awaited her for a period of 100 years. It is imperative that you provide assistance, Vera. What measures can be taken to rekindle the love between the two parties? Ilara pleaded as she took hold of Vera's hands. Ilara, the likelihood of His Highness's affection for you waning is negligible. It is my estimation that His Highness may be. After a period of several hours had elapsed, the royal palace with a slight exhalation and a discernible frown on his countenance, Theron proceeded into the hallway at a deliberate pace. The end. The subject's focus on his internal conflict prevented him from perceiving the unusual silence that had enveloped the palace until he was nearly at the destination of his and Ilara's room. It was at this precise juncture that he became aware of his inability to detect even a single maid within the confines of the private quarters. It was customary for the maids to retire for the night at 8 p.m., but at this time it was only 5 p.m. The absence of domestic personnel was conspicuous. Recent observations indicate that the twins have been allocating increasing amounts of time to Esme, their cousin Leona, and Verac. Consequently, concerns regarding their well-being are mitigated. It is noteworthy that the two 7-year-old brats were the ones who others feared because of their first rank, rather than the ones that needed protection. Upon arriving at the door of his room, his mind was slightly distracted by his internal musings. He exhaled once more, detecting the alluring aroma of the strawberry that he held so dear, gradually permeating the slight spaces between the door and its frame. It appeared that his seemingly indifferent companion had already entered their room. The woman, who was both beautiful and cruel, was likely indifferent to his absence from the royal palace that day. The intensity of his affection was such that the prospect of being separated from her for an extended period was nearly insurmountable. However, it was conceivable that she could manage without his presence. It is imperative to ascertain whether she had perceived his marked disengagement from her this week. He reflected on the matter with a sense of despondency. He reluctantly acknowledged the likelihood of that outcome. At the beginning of the week, he had been preoccupied with pressing matters at the council's office, which had led to his tardy arrival for dinner with his friend. Upon arriving home, he experienced concern regarding the potential state of Ilara, who may have been deprived of sustenance while awaiting his return. However, it should be noted that she did not seem to be perturbed by his absence from the table, and in fact, she consumed her meal without any difficulty or concern for his presence. On the one hand, he felt gratitude that his diminutive wife was nourished and well cared for, on the other hand, he felt resentment that she was in a state of sufficient well-being to consume food without his assistance. This sentiment represented a multifaceted emotional state. This phenomenon was a subject of profound contemplation for him, exacerbating his feelings of internal conflict and uncertainty regarding the nature of her sentiments towards him. It is imperative to determine whether the aforementioned bond was exclusive to her relationship with her mate. The crux of the narrative is whether the protagonist's love for the character is authentic. On that occasion, he resolved to ascertain the extent of her affection for him. Despite the profound sense of loss experienced, he refrained from embracing her, choosing instead to maintain physical distance. However, she exhibited no discernible response. Consequently, a series of events transpired, and a week had elapsed since he had endeavored to provoke a response from her. He sought the slightest indication that she was discomfited by the perceived alienation between them. However, there was an absence of any indication that she was displeased. A sense of disquiet prompted him to clench his jaws as he placed his hand on the handle and gradually opened the door. Regardless of the circumstances, he remained steadfast in his commitment to Alara, never relinquishing her company. Ultimately, he would develop an affection for her that would benefit both individuals. It became evident that the subject's well-being was inextricably linked to the presence of the object in question. He found himself unable to endure another night without the comfort of her presence, and thus, he resorted to the only viable solution he could think of, returning to his previous state. His profound affection for her compelled him to remain in proximity, despite the evident challenges. Despite the dissolution of her romantic attachment to him, she found herself unable to disregard his actions. "Where were you?" A voice, characterized by its demanding nature, inquired. The pitch of the voice was slightly elevated compared to his typical auditory perception, yet he was able to identify it with a high degree of certainty. "I engaged in some business affairs outside of the palace today. I have recently returned." Theron's response was characterized by a composed demeanor, evident in his tranquil countenance as he closed the door behind him. He had already come to terms with the circumstances, and thus did not perceive her slight displeasure, which was evident not only due to her inquisitive tone, but also because of the crossed hands in front of her chest. "And you neglected to inform me of this occurrence? Not even a phone call?" The subject continued to speak with the same voice, but her tone was more grave than before. "Was it necessary for me to contact you? Is it necessary for me to call you each time?" Theron's response, though composed, exhibited a subtle hint of irritation, as evidenced by the use of a question. Despite his attempts to rationalize and reorient himself, his emotional distress persisted, attributable to the unreciprocal nature of his sentiments. It is evident that this is a necessity. It is noteworthy that today is Christmas Eve. In response, she articulated her sentiments with a heightened degree of irritation. Despite her apparent inability to discern his intentions, it was evident that she had perceived his emotional distress. "We are werewolves. We do not celebrate Christmas." His response, albeit tardy and perhaps lacking in the requisite depth, did ultimately elicit a reaction from her, and it was one of sadness. The family's annual Christmas tradition involved the creation of a Christmas tree and the collective exchange of gifts among the children. The subject in question posited the notion that the beings in question were werewolves. However, this raises the question of whether these beings were werewolves in the past as well. "Very well, then. I suppose I will not bestow the gift upon you." She exhaled and drew her robe more tightly around her body. Vera recommended the utilization of a specific method, yet he demonstrated a clear reluctance to accept her gift. "Gift? What gift?" Theron's tone underwent a nuanced shift, transitioning from a state of sadness to one of curiosity. Regardless of the extent of his agitation, a gift from Alara invariably captured his undivided attention. For a brief period, Alara refrained from responding to his inquiry. She endeavored to muster her courage, yet it proved more challenging than she had anticipated. It is possible that the subject's apparent reluctance to bestow the gift was due to a recent emotional disturbance caused by the recipient's verbal statements. Theron reflected on the situation, feeling concerned and eager to immediately justify himself and ameliorate the situation. However, his efforts were interrupted when his wife, who was stunningly beautiful, separated her hands from her chest, taking with them her satin pink robe as well. The speaker identifies themselves as a gift bestowed upon the recipient. Her response was characterized by a reddening of her cheeks, accompanied by his rapid, evasive gaze, which traversed the entirety of her person from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet. It is difficult to fathom how such a thorough examination of every corner of the stadium could have been overlooked. This is particularly salient given that the Santa mini dress, which scarcely covered the desired areas, exposed more than it concealed. The individual expressed their willingness to accept the proposal, stating, "I will gladly accept it." He promptly articulated his observations, expeditiously leveraging his werewolf's swiftness to approach the flustered woman positioned above, who appeared to desire once more to envelop her alluring attire. "You previously stated that you would not be observing the Christmas holiday. Consequently, the recipient will no longer receive the aforementioned correspondence." She expressed annoyance. With his arms already on her waist, effectively impeding her from closing her robe again, Theron's expression swiftly changed to the warmest temperature possible. "The question that arises is how this creature could be so lovable," he reflected. Her puffed out, annoyed cheeks and the scolding tone in her voice elicited a strong desire to consummate their relationship immediately. "I am celebrating it. I will celebrate this event perpetually." He swiftly maneuvered himself onto the bed positioned above Alara, effectively preventing her from escaping his grasp. "You!" She experienced an urge to reprimand him, but was unable to do so, as he ardently covered her lips. Allowing a brief moment to elapse in which Alara could recover her breath, Theron elevated his head slightly, desiring to observe her dazed countenance. "What is the matter?" he inquired hastily, observing the substantial tear-drops that were descending onto his most cherished individual's countenance. He had not anticipated her melancholic countenance at this particular juncture. "I thought you did not love me anymore." She began to weep and embraced him urgently. The act of kissing her was indicative of his continued affection for her, was it not? She fervently hoped, as she tightened her hold on him. Regardless of external circumstances, the speaker's emotional attachment to the object of their affection remains constant and unconditional. The notion of relinquishing this bond is an implausible proposition, as it is an inviolable commitment to remain together. "It is perplexing that you did not deem it necessary to provide me with the necessary information regarding your whereabouts. How could you fall asleep and not embrace me?" The subject continued to express dissatisfaction while simultaneously augmenting her grip. At this juncture, Theron's heart felt as if it were on the verge of exploding at any moment. It is evident that she had observed his gestures and was similarly affected by them. It is evident that she harbored profound affection for him. Her reprimands merely served to exacerbate his irritation with each successive complaint she voiced. The subject's response indicated a state of complete submission and subservience. The clingy werewolf king acquiesced immediately, satisfied as never before that he had compelled the petite woman to admit her love. Subsequently, he ceased to await further developments and proceeded to unveil the anatomical features that had been obscured by the mini-dress. "Concurrently, in other regions, Your Highnesses, I implore you to take note that this will be the final occurrence." Esme exhaled as she took a seat between the two young girls. "Very well." In a synchronized gesture, they nodded their heads in affirmation of their sincerity. Esme was aware that the encounter would not be the final one, as she had been informed on multiple occasions previously. It is noteworthy that, despite their gestures of acknowledgement and agreement, they did not deign to acknowledge her. Despite her efforts to persuade the girls against returning to the mansion, she ultimately succumbed to exhaustion, resting her head on her hands and imitating the unconventional movements of her legs, reminiscent of the two troublemakers. There they are. The young woman with blue eyes, who was of slight build, spoke, and her sister, who was following her line of sight, immediately responded. It has been posited that the subjects in question exhibit a level of aider ability that surpasses their previous manifestations. Both parties expressed satisfaction upon beholding the scene. Your Highnesses, I implore you to speak more slowly. Esme offered a swift response. The subjects were positioned within a tree at the time. Due to the substantial quantity of snow covering the tree, the subjects' white coats and dresses should have provided adequate camouflage. The chosen location for the seat was elevated, but caution prevailed in the face of potential hazards. The subject's statement suggests a degree of indifference to the possibility of being noticed by others. The two entities are once again articulated in unison. No, that is not the case. The timing is not conducive to a face-to-face meeting. She endeavored to persuade the impudent pair, who paid no heed to her admonitions. The absence of acknowledgement from the observers was evident, as evidenced by the act of the two girls dropping two small transparent roses on the ground. Your Highnesses. Esme articulated her concerns. However, by the time she had the opportunity to observe the positioning of the roses and initiate her retrieval spell, they had already been retrieved from the snow-covered ground. Two young boys, remarkably similar in appearance, observed the roses with fascination. These roses exhibited a remarkable property: they underwent a color change when their petals were touched. The query "Peanuts, where are you?" was posed. A man's raspy voice emanated from beyond the light blue roses, redirecting their focus from the floral arrangement to the doorway of the mansion. There, they observed a lofty, solemn figure standing in the doorway. The child's verbal response to their father's call is, "Coming, father." In response to the utterance of their appellations, both subjects advanced in the direction of the mansion's entrance. Your Highnesses, it would be most prudent to refrain from such actions. Lila began to express a sense of defeat. For what purpose? They are ours. It is imperative that they are made aware of this fact. Both individuals exhibited a sense of self-assurance. It is evident that a father's influence on his daughters can be significant, and this phenomenon can be observed in various contexts. The witch's thoughts were consumed by a sense of despair. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.